welcome to part 2 in our series on the Agile Manifesto for business analysts. Today we'll be talking about the value working software over comprehensive documentation, which is probably the most difficult one for business analysts, traditional business analysts anyway, to adapt to. And I'll get to why that is in a minute. But first, why don't we talk about what it means? What does this working software over comprehensive documentation really mean? Well, in a traditional project, progress over the first few stages or phases is measured by documentation. When the vision, business case, architectural concept, and plan are complete, then we know we're finished the initiation phase. When we've completed the use cases, the requirements, the data model, the technical design, the business rules, the supplementary requirements, then we know we're finished elaboration. Then we start developing and delivering software in the construction phase. Your names for your phases may differ, of course. Agile, on the other hand, measures progress by delivering working software regularly. In Scrum, your team will be expected to deliver some functionality, some demonstrable functionality a few short weeks after the project starts, for example. XP and Kanban focus on delivering small pieces of work as quickly as possible and as regularly as possible, and measuring your process and your team's performance by the turnaround of those pieces. This doesn't mean that those documents I mentioned earlier aren't created, and they are still important. But the emphasis in Agile is on delivering software quickly and regularly and using that to measure progress rather than documents. Why is that? Well, I can break that down really into two categories. First of all, let's talk about why not documentation. Documentation is extremely time-consuming, so we need to use it as little as possible. Look at this diagram again. For a large project, this documentation can take person weeks or months to create. Then, as the project progresses, this material is managed and kept in sync with other materials. Change happens, and when you've built all this material up front, and other team members are relying on this material to do their work, it all has to be kept in sync. A scenario in a use case has been removed. Well, then the use case needs to be updated, the business rules need to be changed, the requirements data needs to be changed, the data model needs to be updated, the test scripts need to be rewritten. Design use cases, the architectural diagram might need to be readjusted. All of this is going on an ongoing basis. This brings me to the second reason. Relying on documentation is not as efficient for communication as we like to think it is. We all bring our own experiences and biases to everything we read, and that colors our interpretation. Templates, standards, dictionaries, and other tools can help reduce this miscommunication, but documentation is one-way communication. When we talk to each other, we use all sorts of body language, questions, and other cues to ensure we're understanding each other. We don't get that confirmation when we write and read. The last reason I'll mention against documentation is that documentation reduces collaboration. Innovative designs and ideas and agility come from teams working together. People working together, sharing information, arguing and agreeing and disagreeing. When you pass information as a document, that document is usually perceived to be definitive, and people are less likely and sometimes less able to challenge or even question it. When I say less able, I mean the document may have been stamped and signed and approved, and there is no room to challenge it anymore. This reduces the ability to adapt to change and incorporate ideas that come later in the project. So, documentation has issues. Why is software better? Well, when we see output, we get new ideas. This is often referred to as emergent requirements, or sometimes we like to call it, I'll know what I want when I see it. If you're regularly demonstrating the software, you're going to get a lot more feedback, a lot more valuable feedback, and more ideas from both the team and the customer than you would when reviewing documents and requirements documentation. This feedback results in regular course corrections. If the customer sees things they don't like or didn't foresee, the team can react immediately and change course. When developing documentation for the first few months, this is less likely to happen. If you're not showing the customer any working software until user acceptance testing, for example, which is very common, then there is a significant risk of building the wrong solution. And I've seen this more times than I care to count. Something else I've seen a lot of is IT departments that suffer from a poisoned relationship between the department and the customer. If you're showing the customer regularly what is being developed for them, it does a lot to rebuild that trust. It also usually results in the customer having a better understanding of what IT does and why they need to be involved and supportive. Documentation doesn't have this same effect. The last thing I want to mention is that when you're delivering working demonstratable software on a regular basis, it is possible to ship early. If 2 months into a 6-month project, your organization suddenly has to have something right now, you can deliver something. Maybe the competition is vulnerable because their product got some bad press, or Maybe your business is growing much faster than you expected and you need something in place now in order to help ease the growing pains. If you've been developing documentation for 2 months, you'll always miss that opportunity. So as I stated earlier, this is a big change for business analysts. This might be the hardest part for BAs to adjust to. Most business analysts I work with spend the lion's share of their time creating, reviewing, and updating requirements documentation. So what do you need to do? First of all, you need to stop documenting requirements. Okay, that's not true. But you do need to change your mindset about requirements and how you document them. I'm a business analyst, and so I think I can safely say that we're a compulsively analytical bunch. We want to drive out detail and ambiguity and record everything in detail as soon as possible. And there's nothing wrong with this under Agile or under traditional development methods. But under Agile, you'll need to change the emphasis. Keep asking those good questions, keep pushing for more detail, keep facilitating and eliciting discussion, and keep encouraging collaboration between your team members. However, you need to rethink how you approach recording the information that comes out of this. I can summarize this as document continuously, document as little as possible, and document as late as possible. So, in a traditional life cycle, the majority of the BA's documentation is created in the first few weeks of the project, and then it's managed throughout the rest of the project as changes occur and as updates need to be made. In an Agile setting, you're going to be documenting continuously throughout the life cycle. You need to resist the urge to document everything up front and instead focus on documenting continuously as decisions are made and concurrently while the solution is being developed. This is probably best described using an example. Let's say we start a project with a brainstorming session, and in that session the following user story or use case is proposed. As a customer, I want to be able to send cash to my family instantly in order to help them in an emergency. During this brainstorming session, we ask a lot of questions. What do you mean by cash? How long is too long to be instant? Where are we sending it? Where can we send it from? What is a customer? Etc., etc. However, the business analyst, all we record is the user story as it's written here. Why? Because we probably have 25 other user stories, and we don't know yet whether this user story will even be committed to be completed yet. The details we just described will change between now and when or if the user story is implemented. Therefore, writing more than the user story as is described here is both a waste of your time and a waste of time for everyone else who reads that. The discussion that you had about all the different criteria and all the different information about that user story was valuable in order to get a common understanding about the story. But documenting that, as we described earlier, does not guarantee that common understanding to the people who read it, who are not in the session, right? We also know that writing this in great detail may well discourage discussion and conversation later, so we don't document more. So let's continue with our project. A few weeks later, the product manager or product owner decides she might want to include this user story in the next sprint. She does some more work with the team discussing the user story, and at the end of the meeting, the user story is changed to 3 user stories. As a customer, I want to be able to send cash through an email transfer to another customer instantly in order to help them in an emergency. As a customer, I want to be able to send a prepaid credit card to another in an emergency. As a customer, I want to be able to pay a bill for another customer instantly. Again, as the BA, we're resisting the urge to write all the details that come out of this conversation because the product owner has still not committed to delivering this. It might be in a future sprint, it might not. Other things might take priority. We might record a couple of important acceptance criteria, such as funds must be available within 30 minutes, or must not require either party to know the other's account information. But we're only doing that as a memory jog, not as a definitive specification. And you need to be careful about writing stuff like that down because you don't want to restrict the conversation that's going to happen about it when this does actually get added to a sprint. So now we come to the sprint. The product owner proposes that the second user story, the one regarding describing the prepaid credit card, is going to be included in a sprint. The team discusses the user story at length and comes up with a list of tasks in the sprint planning. Over the sprint, as they're designing and developing the solution, the team defines a process model, an interaction diagram, data model, etc., and the business analyst records this information. When the user story is declared as done, the business analyst has recorded exactly what the requirement was and what was built and how it was tested, which can then be used as a reference for future related user stories and which can be referenced for user manuals, support manuals, etc. What you record in that requirement at the end will depend on your organization. If you're in a highly regulated industry, you might need to record a great deal of detail on that. However, don't think that erring on the side of too much documentation is always the best choice. Remember that the more you document, the more material you'll have to maintain later. For example, if 3 sprints later, 6, 8, 9 weeks later, we come to the third user story above, the one about paying a bill, you may have to ensure that the new material is consistent with the existing material from the second user story. I hope that helps clarify what I mean by document continuously as little as possible and as late as possible. The next video in the series will be about the value of customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and I hope to see you there.